Hello everyone, so today's video I'm going to show you how to test a start capacitor or run capacitor that goes for HVAC system. And you can see we have a capacitor on the table that shows to be a 5 microfarad plus or minus 6% 370 volt capacitor. And this one happens to be about 2 years old, as this used to came out of one of my old AC units that had a bad compressor, so it had to be replaced with the whole system. So you can see we have a capacitor, and we also have another one that actually is a dual run capacitor. Difference between a single capacitor and a dual run capacitor. So we're going to test the dual run capacitor, and you're going to see that we have these 3 terminals that we have fan side, and the herm is the hermetic side for the compressor, and this is common, connects for common to start, which goes for the actual wiring that goes for the capacitor of the wiring that goes for the compressor, and the common and normally common to fan. Usually for a dual run capacitor has common and run for hermetic, compressor, and fan motor. So we're going to test from common to hermetic, and we have 35. So that means we're within range. So that means the capacitor is good. And we're going to test from common to fan. Make sure you have a good connection. And we have 5. So that means that the capacitor is good. And if you find that your capacitor is bulged from the top, and you notice that your capacitor is not working from your HVAC system, you will notice the top likely to being bulged out. But you can see that this capacitor is good, and I don't see any visual signs of residual liquid leaking out or anything. And if that was the case, you would actually find that your capacitor is bad. And if you do have a bad capacitor and you test it from common to fan, common to compressor side, and if you get nothing in your multimeter that has capacitance, and if you're testing the 2 leads from common to run, and if those things don't show up to a reading, then that means your capacitor is bad. And of course, very easy to test for a capacitor to tell if it's good or not. You can see we have this single capacitor, you can see down there, which is a 5 microfarad 370 volt plus or minus 6% Mars capacitor. So we're going to test this one, and we should get a reading for 5. And you can see that we're within range, so that means that the capacitor is still considered good. And if it's below that percentage of a capacitor that actually is below the microfarads, and if it's actually very weak, out of being nanofarads to the capacitor reading you test on, will likely tell you if it's bad. But you actually can tell that this capacitor is still good. It's within range, plus or minus 6%, so that means that this capacitor is still good. It will still run the motor. And if your capacitor is not good, and you likely will see the top bulge out, or most times you'll find that the capacitor is all swollen, and sometimes they will swell in the bottom, as you can tell. If you were replacing an AC start capacitor, you should turn the power off to your AC unit. And if you're doing AC capacitors like this, you should turn the power off to your AC unit, disconnect it from the breaker disconnect, make sure that the system is fully off from the breaker, discharge the capacitor with a screwdriver or something that has an insulated part. You just need something like a Phillips screwdriver or nut driver. You just need to short out these spade terminals. All you're doing is discharging the capacitor from all that residual charge that's left in there. But you can tell this capacitor is not charged. It's not been used. It's actually discharged already from being pulled out from the old unit that actually had a bad compressor. One of the old 33-year-old system that happened from last year, where we had the AC unit replaced over a bad compressor. So one of these capacitors in the old system were still good, and these were replaced like 2 years ago from an air conditioner guy that came by, did our air conditioner. So that was one of the most case of what was causing for the no cooling issue that we were having before with the old AC unit that actually didn't have this type of capacitor before. But this is like apparently one of the capacitors that has been used like 2 years ago from when we had our AC serviced on. Something I want to mention to you guys, that these AC capacitors you seeing in here normally sits inside the unit with the compartment from the electrical compartment. And remember, these things are not something you should never be messing with if you're not professional. And if you don't know what you're doing, you should never work on one of these. These things have huge enough electrical charge in this, and if you touch your fingers on one of these terminals with a capacitor, spade terminals attached to the electrical system of the AC unit, this can give you a good jolt of electric shock. Because this one is a dual run capacitor. You will normally see this in all HVAC air conditioner units that has this type of capacitor, or some of them with aftermarket parts you put in, just like a rescue motor would use this type of single capacitor for a 5, or most of the time would be a 10 or 7.5 for most single capacitor applications like this. But this one happens to be a 5 Mars capacitor that came out of a rescue motor. So apparently this happened to be one of the good capacitors that I pulled out from an AC unit of one of mine that had an old unit that had a back compressor, ended up going towards the whole system having to be replaced. Just to show you guys on a good capacitor on what capacitor reading is in one of your ACs going out, or one of your systems, even if the fan is not running and your compressor is, most cases always check the capacitor. And there are ways you can possibly look for any symptoms of an issue. If your fan wasn't to run and you find that your compressor is running, the fan doesn't, most cases you'll verify it just by the noise of the motor. And if you hear the motor humming, most cases 95% of the time would be the capacitor. And if you find that your fan motor, if you were to pushing the fan blade with a stick or something to spinning the blade with the unit running, and the fan spins and starts going up at speed, then you know likely that you have a dead capacitor. And there are ways to tell, even if you have an AC unit that actually expects to have a problem where an outdoor unit was to running, and then you find that your fan is not working. And usually in most cases these things are made to have its own potential to having a start component that helps the compressor and fan motor to start on a shared common for the dual run capacitors that would normally share not just the compressor. The fan motor shares both compressor and fan with a shared common with this 4 spade connectors, as you can tell, for this dual run capacitor. And also this one is a single capacitor. Even if you have a PSC motor or a rescue motor, this will typically normally use for blower motors on furnace air handlers that have an air blower motor. Even also they use this also in air conditioner units for rescue motors that normally use this type of capacitor. And usually with this one, this is a dual capacitor. This is usually uses normally on an original fan motor and also the compressor. Usually there are some wires that you normally have to read through the wiring diagram to know where and how capacitors are wired. Normally all air conditioner units have a diagram that tells you in the wiring and stuff. Always pay attention to when you're replacing these capacitors. And if you know what you're doing, you always got to know disconnecting the power to your unit. But this is not something you never should do yourself. If you don't know what you're doing, don't do this yourself if you're not knowing trainedly. Because I'm a trained professional and I already know of troubleshooting things with capacitors. An older unit that had a compressor that was on just the compressor side, that was running just the common and hermetic side. Normally, for all AC systems, they will normally have a normal connections. Even also another common would also add to the point of a wiring that usually there will be a brown wire that connects from here. But usually back in the old days when I had an AC unit that had original fan motor, used to have this on an oval capacitor that actually was a dual run old capacitor. The old one I usually had in there before actually went bad back in 2023, where the compressor wasn't starting and it ended up going off an internal overload. So we ended up calling the AC guy. They came out to change it, and they actually put this capacitor in one of my AC units. And I did not install this capacitor in this AC unit. The air conditioner guy, like 2 years ago, actually changed it because one of our AC unit was internally short cycling for some reason. And they found that they tested the capacitor with the old one that was originally in the system. They tested it, they found it bad, so they had to replace this dual capacitor, and they got this one in there. So apparently this is a video of how to test a start capacitor. Even also works the same way for a single capacitor if you have capacitors like this that you have that are having a problem, or if you know likely that you find that your capacitor in one of the top of the heads are bulged for a cause of an AC unit not starting, or you hear humming noises coming from the compressor, or most times compressor will run, the fan won't. Or sometimes it will run, sometimes they won't. Normally with the fan, or you will notice the fan just stops running and you just hear the compressor running, and it can barely go off an internal overload as if high hit pressure hits. System has an internal overload for electrical reason and safety device where it will open the common to the circuit of the compressor. So if a capacitor was bad, or if it was not within range with this type of rating of a capacitor on an AC system, for a bad capacitors would cause the system to overamp, trip an internal overload, save the compressor. That most cases our motors can barely overheat from overamping, or not having the right capacitor in there could lead to straining out the compressor and potentially burn the windings out of a motor. Systems that have a capacitor that's out, normally you'll notice it when your AC is not working with the outdoor unit, where the fan doesn't come on, you just only hear your compressor come on. Normally you'll find that 95% of the time would be the capacitor for mostly the fan, but sometimes, usually, you'll notice how worse they were if the system wasn't running. You just hear a deaf hum from the compressor. You'll hear the fan kick on and you just notice your compressor just kicks on. For most cases, if a capacitor was to be completely bad from where it loses its capacitance over so much out of overheating, these capacitors fail. And that's typically the reason why capacitors are normally known to fail, causing system to shut off on thermal overload to a system that's overheating. This capacitor is likely to the part of failing. Hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please consider hitting the like button and make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already on this repair channel. And have a great day. Stay safe. Bye.